Hi, everyone. Today we are, as promised, still trying to figure this out. Someday I'll get good at it. As promised, I'm here to talk about protein. So protein is a really hot topic, mainly because of the popularity of higher protein diets these days. In my books, the PCOS diet plan and the prediabetes diet plan, I recommend a little more protein than is typical or maybe necessary for some people as a means of helping people to feel more full and then being able to curb their carbohydrate intake to manage insulin resistance. So today, though, I just want to talk about what is protein and how much do we actually need? And there's actually differences between how much do you need to prevent protein deficiency versus maybe optimally to build up your muscle, maintain your muscles, particularly as you get older. As I mentioned before, protein also helps people feel fuller faster and feel fuller longer. So there are reasons to eat more protein aside from just the requirements that you need to stay healthy. So the first thing I want to talk about is how do scientists and government health organizations estimate how much protein people need. So those tend to come from population studies, and they tend to look at how much do you need to not develop a protein deficiency. And that amount of protein intake is actually a lot smaller than most people think. So because the way research studies are, findings are kind of laid out for health professionals like me, they tend to make recommendations in grams per kilogram. So I just want to talk about that for a second. So if you look at this handout right here, there are two different ways to talk about protein intake. There's estimated average recommendations. Actually, I realize this is showing up backwards on the screen, I think. And then the recommended dietary allowances. So the estimated average requirement is the daily nutrient intake estimated to meet the nutrition requirements of half of healthy adults. So we're talking about healthy people. The RDA is estimated to meet the needs of 97 to 98% of adults. So because these recommendations talk about grams of protein per kilogram, I just wanted to do a little math refresher and remind you how to convert from pounds to kilograms. So if you take your weight in pounds and then you divide it by 2.2, you will come up with kilograms. So the other thing that I wanted to mention, and this might be a little more advanced math than people want to hear, but if somebody is much heavier than is ideal, nutritionists use this way to estimate how much protein they need by using an adjusted body weight. Because if someone is heavier because they have a larger percentage of body fat, that doesn't mean that you need, gram for gram more protein to accommodate that extra weight. So we take somebody's actual weight and we subtract their ideal weight from that, come up with a number, multiply by 25, and that's the number that we use. So I don't expect you to do this kind of math, but I just want you to know if you're overweight or obese, you don't necessarily need these grams per kilogram of your actual weight. It's more based on closer to what your weight ideally would be. So that might be enough just to add some confusion. So when we talk about protein needs, and again, I have my list here that I think is going to show up backwards. It's grams of kilogram for protein for children. So birth to 6 months, it's 1.52 grams of protein per kilogram. 7 to 12, it's 1.2. 1 to 3, it goes to 1.05. So between that first year of life and then the second year forward, there's not as much protein required per pound or kilogram of weight because the rate of growth is not as rapid, but it's still higher than it is for adults. 4.8-year-olds and 9 to 13-year-olds, the recommendation is the same. It's 0.95 grams of protein per kilogram. And then it goes down to 0.85 once they hit the 14 to 18-year-old group. And that's because they're approaching becoming adults at that point. So adults' requirements, again, sorry if you're looking at it backwards, 19 to 50-year-olds and they're forward. So they have different age brackets, 19 to 50, 51 to 70, and 70 and older. And they say the estimated amount to prevent deficiency or to meet the needs of about half of people, that estimated requirement is 0.66 grams. So once people reach adulthood and they're not growing nonstop, they don't need as much protein. The RDA, the recommended dietary allowance that's recommended to meet 97 to 98% of people, is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram. So again, we're talking about how much do you need to not be deficient and get enough for good health. And the requirements don't differ from men to women because scientists believe that we metabolize proteins similarly, so there aren't different numbers. So if you were kind of to try to, you can do the math and crunch out your own number, or probably even easier is to go to some app and punch it in there. But I think it's helpful for people to realize that the amount of protein that's currently being advocated tends to be much higher than people actually need to not get a deficiency. So if you were to crunch out those numbers, on average, it's somewhere between probably 50 and 60 grams of protein is enough to prevent deficiency in most people. So what about optimizing health, though? And that's particularly of concern for people who are older. So there is a research initiative that may at some point result in some differences in how much protein the government recommends for people over age 70. But I just wanted to point out one study. This was from the journal Nutrients in 2015 that actually recommends that people over the age of 70 aim for more like 1 to 1.3 grams of protein per kilogram if they're just healthy and trying to maintain their muscle mass. And if they have any kind of chronic disease, it may be more like 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram. So in my job at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, where I'm caring for people who have cancer, those 1.3 numbers are much more common for us to be estimating for our patients. And the reason why these scientists are advocating for higher protein requirements is because as we get older, we don't utilize protein as efficiently. So to kind of create a buffer, it's important to try to eat a little more protein at that age. And the unfortunate reality is many people, as they get older, their appetite can sort of start to decline, and they're actually more prone to eating less protein at that age. So anybody over the age of 70, it's even more important to eat more protein. And you can ask my father, I'm always harping on him about this, to maintain his muscle mass. Of course, maintaining muscle mass throughout life, not just when we're older, it's critical to do some strengthening exercise because, as I always tell my patients, if you want to build muscle, regardless of your age, but this is also especially true of people when they're older, you need three things. You need to eat enough calories. So when food comes into the body, the first thing the body goes trolling around for is calories to fuel your metabolism. Keep your heart beating, breathing, digestion, the essential work of the human body, that's your metabolism. And your body needs calories for that. So ideally, we would eat enough calories so that when you eat protein, it's not thrown into the fire to be burned for calories, but is set aside or spared from that to be available to build up your muscles and your red counts and your white counts, your immune cells, maintain your organ mass. This is all we call lean body mass. But it won't, some of it will get thrown into the fire and burned for calories if someone is skimping on the calorie piece. So you need to eat enough calories so that when you eat protein, it's set aside, spared for anabolism, building up the body, and then you need to push on your muscles. You need to do some strengthening activity, which again, as we get older, people are often less likely to do. But we know a lot of seniors are getting out there and lifting weights, using bands, doing all kinds of resistance type training, but many people are increasingly sedentary and not using their muscles, which just kind of exacerbates this decline in muscle loss, which is really important for maintaining your independence. Because after all, as we get older, we all want to be able to go out and take a walk if we want to, do our own shopping, take ourselves to the bathroom. That requires muscle mass. So there is a movement afoot to try to bump up that requirement. And so I tell all my older people to go for over 1 gram of protein per kilogram to try to maintain those muscles. So what about athletes? The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the American College of Sports Nutrition have recommendations for athletes. So these numbers the numbers range from 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. The higher numbers would be more appropriate for somebody who was doing bodybuilding, really trying to build up their muscle mass. But more is not necessarily better. So I think it's important to point out that the average athlete is hungry enough from all of their activity that if they're incorporating protein foods, which we'll review in a second, in their diet throughout the day, and they generally actually often overshoot the mark with a lot of protein shakes and things like that, are probably very easily or readily getting that amount of protein. So the other thing that's important to point out for athletes is that it appears that muscles are more primed to rehabilitate themselves and mend repair if you eat protein in that 2-hour window post physical activity. So that's protein by itself, with or without with carbohydrates or without carbohydrates, though it's important to kind of restore your carbohydrate storage in that hour after you work out. So doing a workout and coming home and having, you know, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or some crackers and cheese, or some Greek yogurt, or protein shake if that's your preference. It's just important to keep in mind that there is only so much protein your body can use at one time, which brings me to my next point. How should protein be consumed over the day? So we now have more of an appreciation that protein, your body has a finite ability to use a certain amount of protein at once. And that number seems to be about 30 grams of protein. So it's about the amount of protein that's in, like, say, 4 ounces of meat, chicken, or fish. The thing is, if somebody, particularly in an effort to build up their muscle mass, I hear this a lot, somebody will come home after workout, you know, eat a good size lunch or dinner that's ample in protein, and then pound a protein shake. And the reality is, beyond that 30 grams of protein, there's not a whole lot your body can do with that because of the mechanisms that we need to rally to metabolize protein. So that's a really important point I want to make, is that to just focus on the number of grams of protein that you need is not enough. You want to think about distribution. So ideally, we would get somewhere between 25 and 35 grams of protein per meal spread out over the day so that you're optimally utilizing that protein that you're eating. I think it's also important to include protein in a snack for a number of reasons. First, to contribute to this kind of accumulating protein requirement that we need, but also proteins eaten along with carbohydrates help to complicate the digestion of the carbohydrates. So your blood sugar rise in the hour or two after you eat is more muted, as opposed to more of a spike when you eat carbohydrates straight up. So I talk about this more in the PCOS diet plan and the prediabetes diet plan. But again, I don't think protein is just about daily numbers. It's about how much should I eat at once. And, you know, also I think it's important to know that according to the health organizations, the government health organizations, protein intake can vary anywhere from 10% of calories, which is really bare minimum, all the way up to 35% of calories. So there is a lot of variability in terms of how much protein any one person can eat. But again, in the populations I tend to care for, women with PCOS, people with prediabetes trying to prevent diabetes, I think eating a little bit more protein is a good idea because it helps to fill you up and makes it easier to eat less carbohydrate. The last thing I wanted to touch on before I actually look at some protein sources, and I actually just raided my refrigerator and just pulled out a bunch of stuff, is how much protein is too much. So this is from the National Institutes of Health. It's from a research study that basically says long-term consumption of protein at 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per body weight for adults is considered a safe amount of protein to consume. So again, you can get into higher levels of protein intake if you pound a lot of protein shakes. And again, there's a limited amount that you can do with those protein shakes. So you should use them sparingly, maybe in between meals, as opposed to kind of chasing a meal that already had all the protein in it. But the tolerable upper limit, which is considered sort of the safe upper limit, is 3.5 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. That's an awful lot of protein. So we do hear things like too much protein can damage your kidneys and your bones and be dehydrating and things like that. That's only likely to occur in people that are really going way overboard. You know, in theory, it can affect your health. And certainly too much protein that's consumed that's not used is just going to get stored as as fat. So again, our body is very good at not wasting calories, but that doesn't mean most of us need to be eating all that extra protein. So just need to make some room here. I raided my refrigerator, and I think the meal that people need to think most of in terms of trying to add some protein in there is breakfast. So eggs, you know, obviously great source of protein. Most people like them, in my experience, one way or the other. If it's not straight up scrambled or fried or as an omelet, people like quiche and frittatas and French toast. I actually this morning for breakfast had a small bowl of mini wheats, and I took a scrambled egg and I scrambled it in a custard cup with a little bit of milk and a little bit of cheese, and I zapped it in my microwave for 1 minute and 20 seconds and had a microwave egg. It's also easy to just hard boil a bunch of them. My sister-in-law is great at this, Carolyn, and I can never remember what she told me, that either the white ones or the brown ones are easier to peel once you boil them, but there is one that apparently is easier. Milk, you know, I have 3 sons. 2 of them are living at home right now. I go through a lot of this. Milk is about 1 gram of protein per ounce. If you're interested in plant-based milks, I did do another video on plant-based milk alternatives, and they are definitely not all created equal. Peanut butter, Teddy Peanut Butter is actually from the Boston area here. The factory is about 4 miles from my house. Love peanut butter. Again, you just got to be wary that it's 95 calories a tablespoon, but using it on crackers or on a piece of fruit as a snack is a great idea. Beans, cheap, flexible. You can throw them in salads. You can eat them as hummus. This happens a lot. I ask people, do you eat beans? And they say no, and they make a yucky face. And then I say, do you eat hummus? And they say yes. So they do eat beans. Tuna. Does anybody notice that the tuna cans, like the yogurt containers, are getting smaller and smaller? But tuna is a pure source of protein and good for everybody. If you're a pregnant woman, you don't want to be eating a lot of this white tuna. This is albacore. Light tuna is low in mercury. Albacore, you probably want to limit to once a 1 can a week. Cheese, this is Laughing Cow cheese. I, at any time, have about 5 kinds of cheese in my fridge. That's the kind of people we are. Yogurt, this is Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt has about 3 times the protein content of regular yogurt. So if people like Greek yogurt, I always encourage them to eat it. Though in my experience, there are some people that don't like regular yogurt but like Greek yogurt because it's thicker. But there are other people that don't like Greek yogurt because it's thicker. So, but it is a very popular food. Nuts, these are walnuts. I eat them every morning from Trader Joe's. If you have a Trader Joe's near you, they actually, I'm told, have the lowest price on walnuts because they move so many of them over the course of the day. They sell tons. And then quinoa. I also bought this from Trader Joe's, but it is by Nature's Earthly Choice. Quinoa is a plant protein that is considered biologically as good as animal protein. And another food that falls into that same category is soy, considered excellent quality protein. So hopefully I added a little to the discussion, didn't confuse you too much with the math. And I hope that was helpful. Have a good day.